The wind carried the sound of distant thunder, but it wasn't the weather, it was war. Black smoke clawed at the pale morning sky, and the sand trembled beneath the weight of something no one was ready for. They said no civilian should ever step foot here. No one untrained, unlisted, unbound by rank or uniform. And yet, she came anyway. If you believe that sometimes courage lives where it's least expected, make sure to like and subscribe, because this story is one you'll never forget. The convoy slowed as it approached the crumbling remains of a village swallowed by conflict. Dust rolled off the tires in restless spirals, catching the faint orange glow of the morning sun. The Marines in the first Humvee scanned the horizon, their rifles steady, eyes sharp. For days, enemy snipers had picked off anyone reckless enough to cross this stretch of desert without cover. The second vehicle hissed to a halt, and the back door creaked open. Out stepped a woman, late 20s, dark hair tied back beneath a tan cap, her boots sinking into the hot sand. In her hands, she carried something that silenced the low chatter of Marines around her, a Barrett M82 anti-material rifle, its black steel catching the sunlight like a blade. Somewhere behind a cracked wall, a voice muttered under its breath. "Who the hell is she?" She didn't answer, didn't glance their way. Her eyes locked on the ridgeline ahead, where heat waves shimmered like ghosts and the muffled crack of distant gunfire echoed faintly. Every Marine there had trained for this. Every Marine there had signed their oath. But she wasn't supposed to be here. And yet, nobody stopped her. An older sergeant stepped forward, dirt smudged on his jaw, confusion etched deep into the lines of his face. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you're not on the roster. This isn't." She cut him off before he could finish, her voice calm but unyielding. "I know where they are." The words hung in the air like smoke. Everyone knew who they were, her brother's unit. A recon squad sent 3 days ago, now missing beyond the ridge. Command had already marked them non-recoverable. No rescue, no backup, no hope. But she had come anyway. A young Marine whispered just loud enough for his buddy to hear. "She's crazy. Walking into a kill zone with that thing." His buddy shook his head slowly, eyes fixed on the rifle she carried. "You don't bring a Barrett M82 unless you know exactly what you're doing." She dropped to one knee beside the hood of a Humvee and pulled out a hand-drawn map, setting it against the metal. The sergeant crouched reluctantly beside her, watching her fingers trace a route along the outskirts of the village, avoiding choke points no one else had spotted. Her voice was steady, sharp, and deliberate. "Your standard approach is compromised. 2 snipers are dug in here and here." She tapped the map with a gloved finger. "If you move forward in formation, you'll be dead before you hit that wall. You swing wide on this ridge instead, circle left, and it'll give you clean line of sight. You've got 14 minutes before reinforcements come from the east. After that, we're surrounded." The sergeant stared at her, jaw tight. Years of training and battlefield instinct told him she wasn't bluffing. He didn't like it, but he believed her. One of the younger Marines finally asked what everyone was thinking. "Ma'am, who are you?" She looked up at him for the first time, her expression unreadable. "Someone who's not leaving my brother behind." Silence settled over the group. Nobody questioned her again. Moments later, the engines roared back to life. She climbed into the passenger seat of the lead Humvee, the Barrett balanced across her lap like it belonged there. The driver glanced sideways, uneasy. "You ever fired one of those?" "Farther than you'd believe," she said flatly. From the back seat, the sergeant leaned forward, voice clipped. "Listen, I don't care what personal mission you're on. You're stepping into our zone, you follow my command." "Understood." She turned her head slightly, finally meeting his eyes. "Sergeant, if we're going where I think we're going, you might want to follow mine." He stared at her, waiting for the trace of a smirk, the flicker of sarcasm. None came. By the time they reached the edge of the village, the silence inside the convoy was suffocating. Through the cracked windows, the Marines could see the skeletons of buildings half swallowed by sand, walls splintered and darkened by fire. Somewhere in that broken maze of rubble and smoke, her brother was either alive or buried beneath it all. Then it came, the sharp, cracking sound of sniper fire tearing through the air. The convoy skidded to a halt, tires grinding against loose gravel. Orders were shouted, helmets dropped, rifles raised. Marines dove behind walls, scanning rooftops for movement. But she didn't duck. She stepped out of the Humvee slowly, Calmly, like she had all the time in the world. Lowering herself onto one knee, she swung the Barrett M82 forward, her cheek pressed against the scope, her breathing steady and deliberate. For a moment, everything was still. Then, one deafening shot. Boom. 600 yards out, a sniper's nest exploded into a cloud of splintered stone and shattered dust. One Marine blinked in disbelief. Holy hell. She didn't celebrate, didn't speak. She adjusted her scope, scanning the horizon, her voice low but commanding. We're clear to move. Follow me. And that's when it happened. The sergeant, 20 years of service, 2 tours, hardened beyond fear, stopped where he stood, staring at her. Slowly, deliberately, he straightened his back, planted his boots, and saluted. At first, it was just him, then another Marine, and another, until the entire squad stood in the burning desert sun, saluting a woman who didn't wear their uniform, but carried their fight in her heart. She gave a single nod, slung the Barrett across her back, and stepped forward, taking point. For the first time since the mission began, the Marines didn't lead. She did. And as they followed her deeper into the ruins, none of them knew yet that by the end of this night, nothing about her, or them, would ever be the same. The Marines followed her in silence, boots crunching softly against shattered stone as the convoy crept deeper into the ruins. Smoke still curled from rooftops broken by shell fire, and somewhere in the distance, a radio crackled faintly. Enemy chatter, low and urgent. The desert heat pressed down like a weight, but beneath it all, a colder truth hung heavy in the air. They were crossing into ground marked lost. To everyone else, this was just another forgotten war zone. To her, it was where her brother had vanished 3 days ago, swallowed by chaos and silence. Command had already sealed his file, written him off as one more casualty. But she didn't believe that. She couldn't. 5 minutes passed. 10. Not a word was spoken until the sergeant, walking just behind her, finally broke the quiet. You want to explain something to me? He asked, his voice low. You don't walk into a kill zone like this without a damn good reason. You said your brother's in there. Fine. But how in God's name did you even know where to find him? Her eyes stayed fixed on the ridge ahead, scanning for movement. Because this was our playground long before it became a battlefield, she said softly. We grew up here. I know every ridge, every blind spot, every place a sniper would hide. The sergeant frowned, surprised. You're from here. She nodded faintly but didn't elaborate, and for a moment, her silence said more than words. There was history buried in these ruins, older than any war, older than any uniform on their backs. Finally, one of the younger Marines, a fresh recruit barely out of his teens, spoke up from the rear. Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, where'd you learn to shoot like that? For the first time since stepping onto this soil, she let the ghost of a smile flicker across her face. Long story, she said. Short version? They trained me to make impossible shots, then told me to forget everything I learned. The sergeant's eyes narrowed. They? Who's that? She glanced back at him briefly, the sunlight catching in her dark eyes. People who don't like being talked about. That was all she gave them, but it was enough. The Barrett M82 across her back wasn't a hobby. It was a memory, one forged in places where silence was survival and failure meant more than death. The squad reached the edge of a narrow alleyway, its walls blown apart by mortar fire, the scent of burnt metal clinging to the air. She raised a fist, signaling them to halt, and crouched low against the wall. Through the shattered frame of a nearby window, she spotted something glinting on a rooftop. A scope, barely visible beneath a piece of torn fabric. 2 enemy snipers. She didn't say a word. In one motion, she swung the Barrett forward, pressed it against her shoulder, and exhaled slowly. The Marines watched, holding their breath as if the air itself had frozen. One shot. Boom. The first sniper dropped. She shifted a fraction of an inch, realigned, fired again. Boom. The second went down. 2 bullets. 2 targets. Not a sound beyond the ringing in their ears. The sergeant stared at her like he was seeing something that didn't belong in this world. You, he whispered. You were one of them, weren't you? Special operations. Black file. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. They pushed forward, moving faster now, deeper into the skeletal remains of the city. Her map had been right so far. The ambushes avoided, the traps sidestepped, but the tension only grew. The closer they got to the last known coordinates of her brother's recon team, the more hostile the terrain became. Shadows moved where they shouldn't. Windows cracked with faint movement. And always, somewhere, the sound of muffled voices in a language not their own. After an hour of weaving through back alleys, they reached a collapsed overpass overlooking what used to be a bustling square. Now, it was a graveyard of twisted steel and scorched earth. She crouched behind a crumbled barrier, raising her binoculars. Below, hidden among the rubble, were 3 armored trucks painted in enemy markings. Men with rifles patrolled lazily around them, unaware of the squad watching from above. Her heart sank. Those trucks shouldn't be here. That meant one thing. Her brother's squad had stumbled straight into an enemy staging ground before they went dark. The sergeant leaned beside her. "We moved through that," he muttered grimly. "We're done. Whole squad's compromised." She lowered the binoculars slowly, her voice quiet but sharp. "No. We wait. They'll move supplies soon, and when they do, that's our window." One of the Marines hissed softly. "That could take hours." She glanced at him once, her tone cold. "My brother's been trapped for 72. We're not leaving." Minutes bled into an hour. The heat was merciless, the silence heavier than gunfire. Then, finally, the sound came, engines rumbling, boots crunching. 2 of the armored trucks started rolling out of the square, leaving fewer guards behind. She counted heads carefully through her scope, whispering numbers under her breath. 8 guards left, 2 mounted guns, 1 narrow path through broken debris. The sergeant looked at her. "You're the only one who's been right so far," he admitted reluctantly. "What's the play?" Her gaze never left the square. "You cover the south wall. I'll take the west. When I drop the gunners, you push fast and quiet. No mistakes, no second chances." "You're insane," one Marine muttered. "Maybe," she said softly, loading the first round into the Barrett. "But I'm walking out of here with my brother. Or I'm not walking out at all." They moved like ghosts, sliding into position among the rubble. The Barrett rested across the edge of a collapsed balcony, the sun catching on its steel for just a second before vanishing into shadow. She slowed her breathing, letting her heartbeat settle until time itself felt suspended. 8 guards, 1 at the mounted gun, 1 walking perimeter, the rest knew the trucks. She waited until the perimeter guard stepped behind the wreckage, out of sight from his squadmates. Then she fired. Boom. Before the body hit the ground, she adjusted, realigned, and fired again. Boom. Both mounted gunners down. The square erupted in chaos, shouts cutting through the air, boots pounding against concrete. The Marines opened fire, precision bursts that dropped 3 guards instantly. The remaining men scattered, ducking behind broken pillars and shattered walls. She didn't flinch. Through her scope, she found each target in turn, breath steady, fingers controlled. 3 more shots. 3 more bodies. Silence fell over the square. The sergeant moved up first, scanning the wreckage, then waved the rest forward. They regrouped at the base of the overpass, rifles still raised, adrenaline burning hot in their veins. She didn't speak, didn't celebrate, didn't even exhale until the last Marine gave the all-clear. Then, slowly, she lowered the Barrett and slung it across her back again. The sergeant turned to her, his voice rough but edged with something new, respect. "All right," he said quietly. "I believe you now. But I need to know, if they're alive, how the hell do we get them out?" She finally looked at him, her jaw set. "We're not far from their last coordinates," she said. "If they're alive, they're underground, pinned in one of the storage tunnels beneath the refinery. That's where we go next." The sergeant hesitated. "And if they're not?" Her expression didn't change. "Then we bring them home anyway." They didn't know it yet, but the tunnels would change everything. Inside those dark, narrow passageways, something waited. Something the Marines weren't prepared for, and something she hadn't told them. And by the time they reached the last door, they'd understand why an entire battalion once called her the Ghost. The air inside the tunnels was heavy, damp, and silent, the kind of silence that made your heartbeat sound like an explosion in your ears. Each step echoed softly against the concrete floor, boots scraping against dust and debris. The Marines moved in a single file, rifles raised, nerves wired tight. At the front, she led the way, Barrett M82 cradled in her hands like an extension of her body. Above ground, they had fought shadows and snipers. Down here, it was different. Down here, they were the shadows. The sergeant whispered behind her, his voice barely audible. Coordinates say they were last seen near sublevel C. Should be 2 tunnels down. She gave a short nod, but said nothing. Her eyes traced every crack in the walls, every disturbed patch of dust, searching for signs of movement, of traps, of life. Minutes stretched thin, bending under the weight of anticipation, until finally, they reached a rusted steel door marked Storage 17C. Her chest tightened. This was it. She crouched, pressing an ear to the cold metal. Silence. She glanced back at the Marines, holding up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. The sergeant swung the door open. Inside, the beam of her flashlight cut through the darkness, and then she froze. On the ground, huddled against a crumbling wall, were 3 figures in battered gear, helmets off, faces pale beneath grime and exhaustion. One of them was her brother. Michael, she breathed, rushing forward. His head jerked up at the sound of her voice, confusion clouding his bloodshot eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he let out a strangled, disbelieving laugh and pulled her into a shaky embrace. You shouldn't be here, he whispered, his voice raw, weak. Neither should you, she shot back softly, gripping his shoulders. But relief was short-lived. One of the surviving Marines from his recon team, barely conscious, wounded, rasped out the words that sent ice crawling down her spine. They know we're here. And then it began. The first explosion shook the tunnels like an earthquake, showering them with dust and fragments of concrete. Shouts echoed in the distance, heavy boots pounding against steel grates. The enemy had followed them, and they weren't coming in small numbers. She turned sharply to the sergeant, her voice cold, sharp, unyielding. Set up defensive positions. We hold them here. The Marines scrambled, dragging broken crates and pikes to form makeshift barricades, while she climbed onto a higher platform near the tunnel mouth, Barrett positioned and ready. The lights flickered overhead, casting the passage in pulses of shadow and gold. Then, from the darkness, came the first wave, rifles flashing, shouting voices bouncing off the walls. Her Barrett roared. Boom. One down. Boom. Another. Each shot landed with impossible precision, cutting through chaos like lightning splitting the sky. The Marines returned fire, holding their ground against overwhelming odds. Sparks flew from ricochets, shouts and screams tangled with the deafening roar of gunfire. Smoke filled the air, stinging eyes, blurring vision. At one point, the sergeant ducked beside her, yelling over the thunder of her rifle. Why aren't you military anymore? With aim like that, why walk away? Her answer came between breaths, steady, unbroken. Because I didn't walk away. They told me to disappear. Another shot. Another body fell. The sergeant stared at her for half a second, long enough to understand she wasn't here because she wanted glory. She was here because she refused to abandon the people she loved. But the enemy wasn't stopping. More boots thundered down the tunnel, more shadows spilling into the flickering light. They were running out of ammunition, out of cover, out of time. Then, she spotted it. A structural weakness in the ceiling above the choke point where the enemy was flooding in. Exposed support beams, cracked concrete, fragile from earlier shelling. One well-placed shot. She didn't hesitate. She switched to armor-piercing rounds, steadied her breath, and fired. The tunnel shook violently as the ceiling collapsed in a roar of stone and steel, sealing the passage in a cascade of rubble and dust. Silence followed, broken only by the ragged breathing of exhausted Marines. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Then the sergeant let out a low whistle, shaking his head in disbelief. You just saved all our lives, he muttered. She lowered the Barrett slowly, wiping grit from her face. No, she said softly. We saved them. Minutes later, they regrouped in the storage room. Her brother leaned heavily on her shoulder, pale but conscious. The Marines patched wounds where they could, checked ammo counts, and prepared for extraction. Above ground, support units were already inbound. Now that the comms were re-established, they had a window. The sergeant stood at the tunnel exit, watching her quietly. Finally, he walked over, his boots crunching softly on broken stone. You know, he said, voice low, I've served 20 years. I've seen men freeze, seen them run, seen them fall. But I've never seen anyone lead like that. She shook her head. I didn't lead. I just refused to lose him. He gave a faint smile, then straightened his back, boots clicking together. And then he saluted. This time, the entire squad followed, one Marine, then another, until every soldier in that tunnel stood silently, boots firm, rifles resting against their shoulders, saluting a woman who didn't wear their uniform, but carried their fight in her heart. For a long moment, she said nothing, her throat tight, the weight of it all sinking in. The years she had spent in the shadows, the ghost she had carried, the brother she had almost lost. Finally, she gave a small nod and turned back toward the light breaking faintly through the upper hatch. They walked out of the tunnels together, battered but unbroken, the desert sun spilling gold across their faces. By the end of that day, the story had already spread, about the woman who walked into a war zone with nothing but her rifle, her will, and a promise she refused to break. And the Marines who followed her would never forget the moment they saluted the ghost.